The town had always whispered about its own shadows, but no one expected the darkness to walk openly into the courthouse. The morning mist clung to the brick streets, and even the sun seemed hesitant to rise fully as the young man stepped from the wagon, his eyes unnervingly calm, carrying the weight of generations no one dared name aloud. In the crowd, heads turned, murmurs rising like a low tide, yet no one spoke the truth. They feared the secret already whispered through brittle hallways and fading photographs. At the center of it all sat the grandmother, regal in her frailty, her hands steady but her eyes carrying the tremor of decades of hidden choices. When the papers were placed on the oak desk, the clerk froze, sensing the gravity of what would follow, though the law demanded its ritual be performed. A hush fell across the room, the kind of silence that presses against your chest, and in that moment, every person present felt the full weight of a union that should never have existed, a lineage twisted upon itself until reality seemed to shiver. Outside, the wind howled through empty streets, and inside, the courthouse walls held their breath, as though even they feared what was about to be declared official. No one spoke, but the whispers of ancestry, obsession, and forbidden desire seemed to fill the space, curling around every heart and refusing to leave. The town had always been small and insular, a place where everyone's history was intertwined like the roots of the ancient oaks lining its streets. To outsiders, it appeared idyllic, almost quaint, with its cobblestone roads, weathered brick homes, and the quiet hum of daily life, but beneath this serene surface lay a lineage that was anything but ordinary. Generations of families had lived here, marrying within the same circles, preserving traditions and property, and maintaining the sort of secrecy that comes from knowing the wrong question could unravel years of carefully constructed appearances. Over time, these interwoven lineages had created patterns that were almost imperceptible at first glance, yet undeniable to those who paid close attention. Some noticed the same family features appearing in children who were supposedly distant relatives, the same unusual gestures, the same eerily similar eyes that reflected memories older than anyone wanted to acknowledge. Rumors began quietly at first, whispered behind hands in dimly lit kitchens or during casual strolls past the courthouse. People would glance over their shoulders, hesitant to speak too loudly, as if even the air itself might carry the tale to the wrong ears. There were tales of cousins marrying cousins for generations, a practice long buried in shame yet normalized by those who believed it was necessary to keep wealth, land, and influence within a select circle. These stories were never written down, never discussed openly, but they threaded through the collective consciousness of the town like a shadow that could not be ignored. Children grew up hearing fragments, overhearing conversations not meant for them, sensing that some lines of the family tree were twisted in ways that were better left unexplored. The local historian had once attempted to document the lineage, charting marriages and births with meticulous care, but even his records were incomplete, and there were gaps where names were smudged or deliberately omitted. Those who asked too many questions often found doors quietly closed, invitations rescinded, and explanations that were vague at best. In this environment, secrecy was survival, and knowledge was dangerous, because to uncover the truth about the town's hidden ancestry was to confront something uncomfortable and unyielding. It was not merely a story of tradition or insularity, it was a story of a community bound by unspoken rules, where the past was a weight pressing down on the present, shaping relationships and decisions in subtle but relentless ways. And within this framework of cautious whispers and veiled histories, the first seeds of an unimaginable revelation were already taking root, lying dormant in plain sight until the moment when the town could no longer look away. The courthouse had always been more than a building in the town, it was a stage where the community's secrets and disputes played out under the weight of officialdom and tradition. Its red brick walls and polished wooden benches had witnessed decades of small-town dramas, arguments over land, accusations of theft, contested wills, but nothing quite like the whispers that began to circulate one chilly autumn morning. It started as a faint murmur among the clerks and officials, a subtle suggestion that something highly unusual was about to appear on the docket. Some dismissed it at first, assuming it was just another rumor born of idle gossip, but the hint carried a weight that immediately drew attention. A union that defied not only custom but the unspoken rules of morality. The courthouse, normally a place of predictable order, suddenly became the center of speculation and unease, with townspeople craning their necks to catch glimpses of any unusual activity. Outside, horse-drawn wagons and early automobiles lined the streets, carrying people who claimed to have heard the news but could not articulate the full extent of it, as if speaking plainly would make the story unreal. Inside, the staff spoke in hushed tones, each word carefully measured, yet each carried the same shock, a marriage pending that no one could reconcile with common sense or conscience. The gossip spread quickly, traveling through back alleys, kitchens, and church gatherings, each retelling amplifying the tension, coloring the facts with fear, disbelief, and morbid curiosity. People whispered about names, relationships, and past transgressions, piecing together a puzzle that had been hidden in plain sight for generations. Children overheard fragments, adults exchanged nervous glances, and the town itself seemed to hold its breath, caught between the desire to know and the instinct to turn away. The young man arrived in town with a quiet, unsettling presence that immediately set him apart from everyone else. He did not ride with fanfare or announce his coming. There were no banners or heralds, only the soft creak of the wagon wheels on the uneven cobblestones and the faint sound of boots striking the ground as he walked with measured steps. His face was calm, almost too composed, as if he carried a knowledge that no one else possessed, a secret encoded in the very lines of his jaw and the set of his eyes. People stopped in mid-conversation to glance at him, feeling an inexplicable chill as their gazes met his. There was something familiar about him, a reflection of faces long buried in old photographs, yet no one could place the connection immediately. Mothers drew children closer to their sides, shopkeepers paused in their routines, and even the sheriff, normally unshakable, felt the prickling awareness that this young man's arrival signaled more than just another visitor passing through. He moved with a strange grace, his body language betraying a confidence that bordered on arrogance, but it was tempered by almost imperceptible hesitation, as though he were aware of the judgment waiting for him at every corner. Word spread quickly through the town. He had come for a purpose, and that purpose was intimately tied to the shadowy past everyone pretended not to see. Whispers followed him like a second shadow, some voices hesitant, others tinged with fear or suspicion, as people speculated about his identity and intentions. Those who thought they knew him from family history squirmed in unease, their memories clashing with the present in a way that made their hearts pound and their voices falter. He visited familiar locations, the old church, the courthouse, the square where town meetings were held, moving through them as though retracing steps already taken long ago. Each stop seemed deliberate, each glance calculated, and the effect on the townspeople was immediate. Unease spread through the community like a slow-burning fire, igniting doubts and resurfacing secrets that had been carefully hidden. It became impossible to ignore the sense that he was not merely a young man entering the town, he was a force that had been summoned, a living link between the past and the present, a reminder that the town's carefully constructed normalcy was fragile. With every passing hour, his presence drew more attention, and the murmur of speculation evolved into tense discussions behind closed doors. Even those who had never heard the rumors of interwoven family ties felt their skin tighten, their instincts warning them that something beyond comprehension had arrived. In that quiet but charged arrival, the stage was set for a revelation that would ripple through the courthouse and beyond, a moment where history and hidden truths were about to collide in ways the town would never forget. The grandmother had always been a figure of quiet authority in the town, her presence commanding respect without effort. Her hair, streaked with silver, framed a face lined with the subtle map of decades spent watching over her family, guiding them with a combination of sternness and care. To the outside observer, she seemed like any elderly matriarch, reserved, dignified, and firmly rooted in the rhythms of a small-town life that had grown predictable over generations. But beneath that composed exterior lay a secret so deeply buried that even those closest to her had only glimpsed fragments, hints of a past that was carefully locked away. She had lived through events that had shaped the family's history in ways that were never spoken aloud, decisions and choices that, if revealed, could shatter the carefully maintained veneer of normalcy. Her eyes, though calm on the surface, carried a flicker of unease, a recognition of the consequences that each new generation of her family could bring. She had been the silent observer of marriages, births, and disputes, always knowing more than she let on, always aware of patterns repeating themselves in ways that seemed almost inevitable. The townspeople admired her, often remarking on her wisdom and poise, never suspecting that those same qualities had been honed in the crucible of secrets that weighed on her conscience. She had been forced to make difficult choices, navigating the complicated terrain of family loyalty, social expectation, and personal survival, all while maintaining the appearance of propriety. Now, with the young man's arrival, the careful equilibrium she had maintained for decades was at risk of collapsing. She felt the old familiar tension rise, the one she had experienced each time the family's boundaries were tested, when whispers threatened to break through the surface and expose the truth she had worked so hard to protect. Every glance she cast, every measured word she spoke, carried a subtle undercurrent of warning, a message that she was both aware and prepared to defend the fragile order of her family. The quiet routines of her days, the tending of gardens, the preparation of meals, the attendance at church suddenly felt like a stage set against the encroaching threat of revelation. Even as she moved with practiced grace, she was acutely conscious of the eyes upon her, the speculation that swirled around every corner, and the undeniable truth that the family's history was about to intersect with the present in a way she could not fully control. She had spent a lifetime guarding secrets that were no longer hers alone, and now she stood on the precipice of a moment that would expose the hidden folds of her past, forcing the town, the courthouse, and herself to confront a reality she had long kept buried in silence, a reality that was both horrifying and unavoidable. The announcement came without warning, delivered in the form of a neatly folded piece of paper pinned to the courthouse bulletin board, its edges crisp and deliberate as if the message it carried demanded attention. At first, townspeople assumed it was another routine notice, a property dispute, a minor legal formality, or perhaps a scheduled community meeting. But as more eyes fell upon the words, the realization settled like a cold weight in the pit of every stomach. A wedding was scheduled, and the names listed, names that had long been whispered about in secret corridors and quiet kitchens, revealed a truth so unsettling it seemed almost impossible. There was a stunned silence in the streets as the town absorbed the reality that a union was being formalized between two members of the same family in a manner no one had ever encountered before. Conversations stopped mid-sentence, hands froze on door handles, and even the wind seemed to pause, carrying a stillness that amplified the collective disbelief. The paper had done more than announce a ceremony, it had shattered the carefully maintained illusions of normalcy that the town had clung to for generations. Gossip ignited like dry tinder, spreading through the community with lightning speed, fueled by both fascination and revulsion. People questioned what they had seen, what they had assumed, and what had been hidden in plain sight for decades. Speculation ran rampant in every corner of the town, from the quiet pews of the church to the bustling aisles of the general store, each person adding layers of interpretation, assumptions, and half-truths. Even those who prided themselves on discretion found themselves drawn into the unfolding narrative, unable to resist the pull of a story so shocking it demanded engagement. Families huddled behind closed doors, whispering about ancestral sins, forbidden ties, and the consequences that could ripple outward from a union so extreme. The courthouse itself became a focal point of tension, its doors both welcoming and foreboding, holding within its walls the formalization of a decision that challenged every moral and social boundary the town had ever recognized. Those tasked with officiating the proceedings felt the strain as well, torn between legal duty and instinctive horror, their hands hovering over documents as though the ink itself might ignite under scrutiny. Children, unaware of the full implications, sensed the unease, their small voices carrying questions adults could not answer. In the wake of the announcement, the atmosphere of the town transformed, every glance and gesture charged with apprehension, as neighbors measured one another, seeking signs of complicity or dissent. The wedding notice was more than paper, it was a spark, igniting the slow-burning fire of revelation, forcing the town to confront the reality of a lineage intertwined in ways that had been hidden for generations, and in that moment, the fragile veil of normalcy began to unravel. The courthouse, normally a place of solemn order and quiet procedure, became a stage for chaos the moment the case was called. Inside, the wooden benches groaned under the weight of townspeople who had gathered not out of civic duty but out of an irresistible need to witness the impossible. As the officials shuffled papers and the clerk cleared his throat, an unspoken tension gripped the room, thick and suffocating, like a fog that refused to lift. When the young man and his grandmother stepped into the chamber, a collective gasp rippled through the crowd, followed by whispers that spiraled into a low, anxious hum. The air seemed to crackle with disbelief, as if the walls themselves recoiled at the sight of a union so unnatural, so profoundly contrary to every moral and social convention the community held dear. The judge paused, pen hovering over the legal documents, and even his measured composure faltered for a fraction of a second as the gravity of the situation settled in. There was a dissonance between the cold, impersonal requirements of the law and the human instinct to recoil from what was happening before their eyes. Families exchanged glances that spoke volumes. Shock, horror, and a reluctant fascination mingled together, a mixture impossible to disentangle. The young man's calm demeanor only heightened the tension, his gaze steady and unreadable, carrying the implication that he fully understood the storm his presence had unleashed. Meanwhile, the grandmother remained composed, yet the faint tremor in her hands betrayed the enormity of the moment and the weight of years spent guarding secrets that now threatened to emerge. Murmurs turned into audible speculation, some voices trembling with disbelief, others tinged with anger or moral outrage, while the younger townspeople stared with a mixture of awe and horror, unable to comprehend the implications of what they were witnessing. The courthouse, a place designed to arbitrate justice and settle disputes, had been transformed into a crucible of collective conscience, forcing the community to confront not only the legality of the marriage but the deeper, more unsettling truths about lineage, secrecy, and human behavior. Questions of morality and propriety collided with the rigid procedures of law, leaving officials, families, and witnesses alike caught between the letter of the law and the instinctive demand for justice, accountability, or even repudiation. Every movement, every word spoken, carried weight, and the very act of pronouncing the union seemed to echo beyond the walls, touching every home, street, and alleyway in the town. The courtroom became more than a building, it became the epicenter of revelation, a place where long-hidden truths would not remain buried, and where the shock of a union that should never have existed reverberated through the hearts and minds of everyone present. The revelation of the marriage sent immediate shockwaves through the family, fracturing relationships that had long appeared stable and exposing tensions that had been simmering beneath the surface for decades. Siblings who had grown up sharing memories and homes now found themselves questioning loyalties, wondering how much they had truly known about the family they believed they understood. Cousins whispered in corners, their voices heavy with disbelief and fear, uncertain of what to say or how to act in the wake of such an unthinkable union. Long-standing alliances formed on the foundation of trust and shared history began to crack, as resentment and suspicion bubbled to the surface. Parents who had once prided themselves on guiding the next generation now grappled with the shame and horror of a secret that had somehow eluded their attention, a truth that seemed to cast shadows over every decision they had ever made. The grandmother, once a unifying figure, now became a focal point of tension, her decades of authority challenged not by her age or position but by the sheer magnitude of the choice she had sanctioned. Arguments flared in hushed living rooms and behind closed doors, voices raised in a mixture of anger and desperation, each person trying to assert their perspective, their moral stance, or their claim to understanding in a situation that seemed designed to defy comprehension. Some family members recoiled in disgust, distancing themselves physically and emotionally, retreating to familiar spaces to avoid the confrontation of having to acknowledge a reality they were unprepared to face. Others, bound by loyalty, struggled to rationalize the union, seeking explanations that could reconcile familial duty with a shocking breach of social norms. The fractures extended beyond immediate relatives, touching distant kin who had long observed the family from afar, their own judgments colored by rumor, hearsay, and personal prejudices. Even the town, which had once viewed the family as a cohesive unit, began to see the cracks, noting the subtle shifts in interactions, the tension-laden silences, and the avoidance of formerly casual gatherings. In the midst of this turmoil, family members wrestled with conflicting emotions: grief for a tarnished legacy, fear of social ostracism, curiosity about the hidden motivations behind decades of secrecy, and an almost involuntary fascination with the taboo that had now become public. Every conversation seemed to carry the weight of judgment, every glance held unspoken accusations, and every encounter threatened to ignite further conflict. The very foundation of familial bonds, built over generations, felt unstable, as if the revelation had removed a cornerstone, leaving the structure vulnerable to collapse. In this environment of suspicion, anger, and moral confusion, long-buried secrets and resentments surfaced, forcing the family to confront uncomfortable truths and challenging the notion that loyalty or bloodline could provide sanctuary from the consequences of choices made in secrecy and silence. The arrival of an investigator brought a new, unsettling dimension to the already tense atmosphere surrounding the family and their shocking union. Unlike the townspeople, who were caught between gossip, fear, and curiosity, the investigator approached the situation with methodical precision, armed with documents, records, and a determination to uncover the truth that no one else dared pursue. From the moment he stepped into the town, his presence stirred anxiety. People sensed that the delicate web of secrecy the family had maintained for generations was about to be probed in ways that could not be undone. He began by meticulously tracing the genealogy of the family, following branches of the family tree that had long been hidden or obscured, reconstructing relationships with a clinical focus that left no detail unchecked. Birth certificates, marriage licenses, and cemetery records were cross-referenced, discrepancies noted, and patterns slowly emerged, revealing a lineage far more entangled than the casual observer could have imagined. Each connection he uncovered added layers of shock, illustrating decades of intermarriage, strategic unions, and a deliberate preservation of bloodlines that defied social norms and moral boundaries. The townspeople, once content with whispers and speculation, were now forced to confront tangible evidence of practices that had been assumed or dismissed as rumor. The investigators' findings were methodical but undeniable, exposing not only the recent marriage but a long history of choices that had shaped the family in ways that were both disturbing and almost inevitable given their isolated circumstances. As the revelations accumulated, the family's carefully maintained facade began to crumble, each record and testimony acting as a hammer chipping away at the veneer of normalcy. Members of the family were forced into uncomfortable confrontations, challenged to explain, deny, or justify decisions that had previously gone unquestioned. The investigators' work created ripples far beyond the immediate household, affecting extended relatives, neighbors, and even local officials who had previously turned a blind eye to the town's murky lineage. Tension heightened with every discovery, conversations became sharper, meetings fraught with anxiety, and everyday routines carried an undercurrent of fear that the next revelation might be even more shocking than the last. The investigator, aware of the profound consequences his findings could unleash, remained relentless, pressing forward with a combination of impartiality and subtle pressure that left no room for evasion. It became clear that what had begun as a personal scandal was now transforming into a public reckoning, a confrontation with a hidden history that had been carefully buried for generations. The uncovering of these patterns forced the town and the family alike to grapple with uncomfortable truths about identity, heritage, and morality, revealing that the consequences of secrecy were far more pervasive than anyone had anticipated and that the shadows of the past were never truly gone, only waiting for someone to shine a light upon them. Once the investigation's findings began to circulate beyond the walls of the courthouse and the confines of whispered conversations, the story spread like wildfire, drawing the attention of journalists, curious outsiders, and sensationalists eager to witness the scandal firsthand. The town, which had once prided itself on its insularity and self-contained order, found itself thrust into the glaring light of public scrutiny, each street and building suddenly a stage for gossip and speculation. Reporters arrived with notebooks, cameras, and an insatiable appetite for the macabre details, peppering locals with questions that many could not or would not answer. The townspeople, who had previously been observers of subtle rumor and hushed conversation, now felt the weight of the world's attention pressing down upon them, a heavy lens focused on their families, their histories, and their morality. Headlines appeared almost immediately in regional papers, their bold letters outlining the shocking union in ways that left little to the imagination, framing the town as a site of aberration and secrecy, a place where societal norms had been flouted for generations. Even those who had tried to distance themselves from the family or dismiss the rumors could not escape the pervasive curiosity that had seeped into every corner of the community. Visitors came from miles around, some driven by a journalistic sense of duty, others by morbid fascination, each wanting to glimpse the courthouse, the family, or even the young man and grandmother who had become the center of this unfolding spectacle. The townspeople felt the intrusions keenly, their daily routines disrupted by the constant presence of strangers, cameras, and note-taking scribes, and every encounter seemed fraught with unspoken judgment. The social fabric of the town, already strained by internal scandal, now faced external pressure that magnified existing tensions. Families who had been fractured by disbelief and anger found themselves navigating new layers of scrutiny, their private grievances transformed into public spectacle. Conversations that were once private, whispered behind closed doors, became subjects of speculation and reporting, amplifying feelings of shame, fear, and outrage. The moral outrage of outsiders, coupled with the relentless curiosity of onlookers, forced the town to confront uncomfortable truths about isolation, secrecy, and human behavior. Every glance, every whispered comment, and every small act of avoidance or confrontation became magnified under the unrelenting gaze of outsiders. The intrusion of public interest did not merely observe the scandal, it reshaped the way the town perceived itself, forcing residents to reckon with the reality that the choices and secrets of the family were no longer contained, they were now part of a story that had taken on a life of its own, echoing beyond the town's borders and ensuring that the shock of the union would not be easily forgotten, its consequences rippling through both the immediate community and the broader world that had come to bear witness to what had once been hidden in silence. The aftermath of the revelation left a lingering sense of unease that refused to dissipate, as if the town itself had absorbed the shock and carried it forward in every glance, every conversation, and every footstep along its familiar streets. Even after the investigators had left and the journalists had moved on to fresher scandals, the weight of what had been uncovered remained, pressing against the community with a quiet insistence. Families struggled to regain a sense of normalcy, but the memory of the courthouse, the documents, and the whispers that had traveled like wildfire made ordinary routines feel hollow and fragile. Parents looked at their children with a new wariness, wondering what hidden patterns of behavior might surface, and neighbors cast furtive glances at one another, no longer certain how much they truly knew about the people they had lived alongside for years. The family at the center of the scandal was forever changed, their interactions forever tinged with the awareness that their private histories had been laid bare for the world to see, and that judgment, whether fair or not, would never fully recede. Secrets that had once provided a protective buffer were now weapons of memory, resurfacing in casual comments, lingering glances, and subtle gestures that reminded everyone involved of the magnitude of what had been revealed. The psychological weight was immense, pride, shame, fear, and guilt intertwined in a knot that no one seemed capable of untying, and even those who had played no direct role in the events found themselves affected by the moral and social ripples emanating from the family's choices. The town's identity, long anchored in the rhythm of small-town predictability, was destabilized, and every public gathering, from church services to market days, carried a latent tension that made ordinary interactions feel charged and precarious. Conversations inevitably returned to the events, revisited from different angles, each retelling adding nuance or judgment, deepening the imprint of the scandal on the collective memory. Over time, the story became a part of the town's folklore, a cautionary tale whispered to children and recounted in hushed tones by adults, yet always accompanied by the unspoken understanding that the reality had been far darker and more complex than any tale could convey. Even decades later, descendants and newcomers alike sensed an invisible weight hovering over the streets and homes, a shadow of past choices and forbidden unions that had altered the trajectory of lives, relationships, and reputations. The legacy was inescapable. The past lingered in the air, shaping every interaction, influencing the ways in which trust was extended or withheld, and reminding everyone that some truths, once uncovered, could never be fully contained. The town, though outwardly resilient, carried the scars of exposure, and the memory of the most inbred and shocking union in its history persisted like a quiet, relentless echo, ensuring that the consequences of secrecy, obsession, and forbidden desire would continue to reverberate across generations, leaving an indelible mark on the collective consciousness.